Destini Ann, welcome to the Disagreement.
I'm glad to be here.
It is great to have you here. We did a disagreement on gentle parenting. We had Lori Gottlieb and Ryan Allen. In that conversation, there was so much to say, and there were so many themes, and I think we'll focus today on the question of should you punish your kids? I will say this though. I think consequences is a better word. I don't like the word punish. So to me, consequences achieves everything you need to achieve without any of the punitive baggage that comes with that word.
Okay. I mean,
Um,
we're probably not going to be able to avoid the punishment word in this conversation because sometimes consequences really are just punishments.
I mean, I just for the most part, I'll use consequences. Let me ask you a question, just in terms of your own like parenting approach. You use the word gentle parenting. Sometimes you use other adjectives as well. Like, how do you relate to this concept? Because it's obviously it's become this sort of culture war, battleground sort of thing. So I'm just curious before we dive in, like, how do you relate to the word gentle?
For me, gentle parenting, like you said, it has become very much a point of contention for people. Number one, I'm going to use it because that's what people are looking up. But then also, there's this idea that gentleness is just in like our tone and like we're supposed to be like this Mary Poppins, like
Yes.
everything is fine. And that's not realistic. I like to hold on to the word because I think that it's something that children deserve. And I don't know why we're like fighting over not being gentle to children. Obviously, that's not what it looks like all the time. But I think that that's important. And for so long, we have been highlighting like behaviorism and these intense consequences and, rewards and punishments. And so, there, in my opinion, is nothing wrong with us coming in as a culture, as a society, and being like, our kids deserve a certain level of compassion and empathy. Like it's not outlandish to me, but I think it being the title and the label makes it seem like that's all that it's supposed to be.
You see it as in line with other adjectives like compassion and empathy. I have an issue with gentle because you're gentle with things that are fragile. And so the idea of being gentle and cautious and walking on eggshells, like, again, I'm all in on compassionate and
Mm.
empathy, but I just think gentle, that word is like really damaging because it, like, if
Mhm.
you treat kids like like they're fragile, like they need to be handled gently, then they start to actually like think that they're fragile and that they need to be handled gently.
I gotcha. So, from my perspective, fragile means something you should handle with care. Like, I'm going to be intentional with how I handle this because their brains are developing. So, there is actually a significant amount of
Okay.
fragility in that.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. So basically, like developmentally, there is some fragility.
1,000%.
So, so to me, when I think about punishment and whether I should punish my kids or give consequences and that whole thing, I think part of that is it's quite reductive. It's not. I don't think it's the right question, or it's not how I think about it. I think about it as building a culture with your family, with your children. I've learned a lot from you in terms of the relational factor. When you're building a culture of discipline, you obviously have to invest deep in the connections with your kids, right? You can't just run around, yelling and giving punishments like a 50s, drunken dad or whatever the stereotype is.
Slamming cabinets.
Yes, exactly. You need the relational part of the culture building. You need the systemic part. You need things to be consistent and predictable, right? You need to make sure that you do what you say you're going to do. Just to begin with, what are your like building a culture of discipline versus just saying you should punish or not punish, right? That's a more productive conversation.
Teaching, modeling, and consistency, I would say, are what I fall in line with, and that sounds exactly like what you're saying. But a lot of that is the environment and the support. I think that's kind of the umbrella of that is what is the environment that I'm presenting for my child in terms of behavior. But a lot of times it's not that. It's looking at the child and what is my child doing, and we're in a constant state of reactivity.
Yes. And I think for me, like I was a teacher, I taught sixth grade. I then started a company that was all about teacher best practice. So much of what I am going to be bringing to this conversation is influenced by my time in the classroom. So, I have a question for you because everyone uses the word authoritative, and it's really, at this point, it's almost useless. So, when you think of a teacher at any grade, and you think of a authoritative classroom or a disciplined classroom or a teacher that has cultivated deep authority in their classroom. What does it look like? What do you see?
So that I think is maybe the challenge in it, and maybe the way that parents see it as well, is that if the parent is authoritarian, the child is well behaved, and if the parent is permissive, the child is out of control. And I would like to think that that's not necessarily as black and white. And so, in terms of a classroom, an authoritative classroom is still going to have those conflicts. It's still going to have children that push the boundaries and that are trying to be out of control. It's still going to have children that shut down sometimes and don't feel open and relational. The difference isn't the children's behavior and what the classroom looks like so much as how the adult in the room manages conflict. That is what looks different. And so,
Yeah, I agree with that, but I would say one important thing is there is in a if you have deep authority, you can minimize a great deal of the
absolutely.
right? And there's a very specific way to do that, which is to invest upfront in the first week of classroom, in the first week of school, in very clear rules, very clear high expectations, very clear consequences, and a dispassionate execution of those consequences.
And you don't think that the relational piece needs to be present in that
Oh,
first week?
100%. But I think one of the big things I'll break us from the classroom and bring us to parenting is I think a lot of the criticism from gentle parenting around consequences that I find frustrating because it's not how I do them is about there's a behavior and you respond with a consequence and there's a behavior and you respond and did they earn that, like why did they deserve that, like I don't abide by any of that. To me there's so much stigma on rules and on punishment, and I'm like, I gave them to each kid 3 or 4 times very early on. I followed through, I did what I said I was going to say, and we almost never used them.
You almost never use what? The consequences?
Like if you create a culture of discipline and you create a culture of deep authority early on, you do not have to then, you are deterring future struggles. The struggles are always there, but you have the authority to deal with them.
Okay, so from my vantage point or perspective, you're basically saying that if the rules are clear and understood and established in the beginning and you're consistent with that, that is creating trust in that relationship and authority and makes a safe space for relationship.
Yes, but the consequences, it's the rules are clear and the consequences are executed. They are followed through on.
Well, my question then would be in understanding values because for some parents, the idea of like taking away privileges or whatever other things would go against their values and would that is punitive. I mean, it is punitive to do that and to teach discipline in that way. And in a school environment where there is so much structure and there's so much consistency, there's not a lot of new things under the sun for a teacher versus being in a parenting capacity. I can give you all of the rules up front and then next year, we're both going to be experiencing things that neither of us have experienced before. And so we're going to have the relationship to be able to weather those kinds of things and those kinds of storms. And so it's very, very different at home. And there's also so many other things like the social component of
The
performing
age
and being
change,
yes.
the fact
Yeah,
that they go
exactly.
through different ages, they're not just this.
Exactly. There's a certain level of shame in terms of being the one that's acting out in a classroom when everybody isn't. So it's definitely a different environment, but are you saying that if you bring that home in terms of hey, in the beginning, I'm assuming maybe you mean the first few years of life, you're like this is the expectation, this is how I show up, or do you mean like if there's a new challenge?
I've been trying to basically this strict teacher approach that lets you establish discipline and authority and hierarchy and control and being in charge. Um, but then once that's there, like being pretty chill, letting things get weird, like letting things get weird because
Mhm.
you on a dime can pull it back. And that to me requires sort of a backstop of consequences, a
Mhm.
system, a predictable system of consequences.
Predictability is so important for children.
So my wife was away for, a few days a couple weeks ago. I got dinner on the table probably an hour later than I was supposed to. Kids were tired. Again, I have a 7-year-old and a almost 5-year-old. So, microwave some meatballs, put them in front of them, and my 4-year-old daughter, um, tried to eat one of the meatballs and it fell on the floor. Now, we historically have not been good about picking up, like enforcing clear expectations and follow through around having the kids pick up. A big part of that is because I'm pretty bad. I'm pretty bad at it. So we had been investing in like, hey, you drop something, you pick it up. Like we all do our part. In particular, there was a mouse. We recently saw a mouse in our kitchen. So we actually needed to like not let meatballs just sit. You're with me.
I get
You're
it.
with me.
I get
Okay.
it.
I say to her, can you please pick that up? She's just like in a funk of some sort and just like looks back at me like, no, there's no way I'm picking that up. So now what do I do? Given everything he said,
I want to know what you did do.
okay. Here's what
Right.
I did. All right, I'll tell you what I did, and then and I'll tell you there's a part two. So I go out of my way to avoid a zero sum conflict with my kids because I don't want that. It's not like it doesn't. It's not good for any of us when you get in that pick it up. No, I said pick it up. No, now all of a sudden you're in a duel. So what I did, I have I call it S&S, slapstick or sarcasm. Like I try to just get around it. So in this case, I dropped down like beneath the island quickly. And we've been talking about the mouse. That's why you have to pick. I had said like, we have mice, please pick it up. And then I just pretended to be a mouse and I grabbed the meatball with my mouth and just like just
Going at it.
ate the meatball. That's what I did. And it was hilarious. Like they loved it. It was hilarious. It was a great moment. Everything I avoided the duel. It turned into like a playful thing. It kind of turned the energy around.
Did you avoid the duel or did you lose?
Okay, great question. Great distinction. I do not consider it a duel until I have used my 3, 2, 1 countdown. And they know this. So I have a 3, 2, 1 countdown. For me, once I have taken my 3, 2, 1 out of my holster, like now we're dancing and now you're going to lose every time. But I try to avoid that at all costs. Like I don't want to get there because it's a sort of a like high stakes place to be.
Is it uncomfortable?
Constitutionally, I'm very comfortable with asserting my authority and
Mhm.
like I'm being somewhat melodramatic, but for the most part, I try to be undefeated in those duels because if you're not, it can be quite empowering. Kids are like both deeply irrational and weirdo, like sort of aliens, but they're also highly rational when it comes to discipline. And if you lose the duel,
Mm.
then there's consequences for you as the
S-
adult.
What do you think is happening? So you've said, "Hey, let's pick up the meatball," right?
Right.
And it doesn't happen. So then you go into ravaging at the meatball and picking it up. Do you think that they're still not as empowered as they would be if you got serious and it turned into the duel first?
In the me being a mouse on the floor and picking it up with my mouth, some amount of dysregulation and frustration. So there was something going on underneath it, right? And I think like sometimes I agree with you. Sometimes it makes sense to like go through the 4 C's that you talk about. The 4 C's are great, but they're a lot. Like I was by myself, they're a lot. I could have said, "Hey there, I can see you don't want to pick up the meatball. I can see that. Tell me, what's going on? Why don't you want to pick up the meatball?" Right? You're not like, do you recommend that? No.
No, but that's what's embodied just in relationship in general. But my question to you would be in this specific scenario, and this is where my clients always get lost, is that I was permissive because that's essentially what that is. Like I made a request, and so now I have to fall on the sword and do it until I was authoritarian, and now I win. You're gonna do it, and so empowerment is not me and you against each other. Like there is no winner for me. Empowerment for me is it's like Dr. Becky would say, it's you and me against this issue. And I think the important part about that is that one day you want her to be able to see the meatball. And it's not just so much about requests. You want her to be able to see the meatball and pick it up on her own and to be able to think critically.
Do you think me doing a slapsticky thing like, "Oh, whatever," was permissive? Like, do you see it as permissive?
So a lot of times, whether it's permissive authoritarian comes with intention, and that's why I prefer the term conscious parenting. Because are we actually conscious of what's going on? And you did just tell us that there was some other stuff going on, and there was some dysregulation in your part. So it
And again,
sounds
it was
like
my
that.
fault.
That sounds like it was more conflict avoidance and And in that sense, yeah, sometimes it can be, I'm just like respecting the evening. I'm just going to go and do it. But because it was sarcasm and it was coming from a place of almost like, okay, well, fine, I guess I'll do it. In my opinion, that action in and of itself sounds more like permissive. Like, you know what? I don't want
Even
this
if
to
I've
turn into
built
a
a
thing.
relationship with them where like where there is a
Just the
underlying
action
like
of itself. Because if that were the case, then we wouldn't turn in it wouldn't have the opposite side doesn't turn into now I have to win and I have to force you to do it.
so the next night, and it wasn't the next night, it was like 2 or 3 nights later. It wasn't a meatball. We'll call it a chicken nugget. Drops it. I'll try to say exactly what I said. "Hey, can you pick that up, please?" She sort of ignores it. Okay. So then I always try to ask 3 times. So I say the second time, like, please pick it up. I forget what she said, but it was like, no, I don't want to. So now at this point, it is to me, I'm like, all right, I'm prepared because if I tell her to pick something up, I need her to pick it up. Like that is very important to me. The fact that when I say something, she will do it. Because honestly, if I don't have that sort of authority or discipline with her, it's unsafe. Like we're in a city. So I go into my holster, start to hold up my 3, 2, 1 count, right? And if we get to 0, there's a consequence. And as soon as I start to throw up the 3, 2, 1, she gets off her thing, she picks it up. What was that? Was that authoritarian?
I mean, the biggest glaring issue is that it's gonna keep happening, but it's uncomfortable for you that it's
It
gonna keep
doesn't keep
happening.
happening, but that's not right. That's not true.
You don't
It
think
doesn't
so?
keep happening. I haven't had issues with it. She picks it up.
I'm no, I'm no, no, no. I mean, in the sense of that, there's going to be something that you have to either bite the bullet, or that you have to either do the countdown or dish out a punishment. And my question to you is, where is the level of acceptance? Because we started this conversation at you need to have the consequences and they need to be consistent every single time, but that's not realistic and that's not how you
Well,
show up.
yeah, it is how I show up. My consequence is when I get to 0, there will be a consequence, and I don't get to 0 very often.
But you know what's inconsistent is when. When is it serious? When is it not serious? When is a big deal? When is this behavior, the specific behavior? If there is a value of we clean up after ourselves, that's the value that we're trying to
Correct. Yes, and
the
that
behavior.
we are instilling in them now. We haven't done the best job. Yes,
Right, exactly. And we're instilling in them now, haven't done the best job, maybe not even modeling it because you just said sometimes you don't necessarily see the clutter, right?
not
And so,
perfect. Yeah, not perfect, but trying. I'm better.
yeah,
I'm getting better. Yeah.
yeah, preaching to the choir. So, if that is the environment, can you see how that may not be the most realistic expectation for there to be a certain level of you need to listen when I say it?
What's about that environment is not realistic. So the only 2 conflicts we've had are the first where I did my mouse, whatever that you would characterize that, and the second where I took 3 fingers out of my pocket, and that was it. I don't see what the issue is. Like,
I don't think that those behaviors are harmful and damaging. I think what I maybe would be interested to see play out in the larger picture is the maybe the control aspect of it, because it's not something that is really a major deal to you in terms of value, because it's something that you're like working on, but you don't sound like it's like breaking you down. The biggest issue is if I say something, I want my child to do it because I said it. And I can imagine, yeah, I can imagine that creates a lot of anxiety for you when they don't meet that expectation.
it's not that I want them all the time to do what I say, that it's the targeted time. That's why having a signal like a 3, 2, 1, which I use maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks,
Well, what
like
happens when you get to one?
they usually do it. I mean, they usually do whatever I ask them to do because they understand that if I get to 0, there's going to be a consequence. So
What
I
would the
haven't given
consequence
men.
have been in this situation? Do they know? Did you say like, okay, once I get to one, X, Y, and
Yes,
Z is going to happen? Or
we use generally unnatural consequences of TV. I mean, they don't have screens, they don't have devices. I use TV and some time period of TV. Now, again, my point is this: like in both those cases, there weren't consequences given, and I haven't given, and all of this might be annoying to you. Like I haven't given a consequence to either of them in probably 6 months because generally, when I need them to do something, they respect my authority and they know if I need them to do something, they either do it or I'll throw up the fingers and then they do it. I don't understand what the issue is. Like gentle parenting has some issue with like that expectation or not. What am I doing wrong?
I would say in the gentle parenting ethos, maybe not necessarily what you're doing wrong, but it may beg the question of in what other ways do you empower behavior that is not attached to fear? So respect is in terms of authority, but it also just is due regard for somebody else's needs, desires, and wants.
Well, let's do a quick hit because because again, I am a fan of yours. I'm a fan of your tactics. There's a lot to learn, especially in the relational side of things,
Yeah.
right? It's the relational side is also foundational. Like my issue with the world of modern progressive parenting isn't on the relational front. Like I think it's the constitutional aversion to like a clear expectation that kids should do what parents tell them to and you should put in place the sort of systems and culture and looks or whatever to have them do that, and that is a good expectation.
Well, that's it's not really a should. That again is going to look different for everybody and in terms of what you think is important in raising your child. I will say though that the relational piece is a lot harder to be intentional about because control is like it's intoxicating and it's very easy and we are naturally bigger than them and we already have the authority and so it is very easy to lean into just the discipline side and the relational side a lot of times goes by the wayside. But the piece that we are missing and that so many people always miss when they're comparing gentle parenting to permissive parenting is the empowerment piece. And so it's always, well, do I pick up the meatball or do I force them to pick up the meatball? And the greater context is not about these micro situations so much as it is about empowering a child's behavior so that there is not an external reward or punishment that actually feeds and motivates the behavior
Well,
long
how do you feel great about picking up a meatball? Like my issue, like is it like, come on, play the Rocky music and get in there?
It's
It's like
scaffolding and it is scaffolding and it is support and it is boundaries in place in the environment that are actually proactive. So I have a preteen and just like every other preteen, we struggle with executive functioning and all of those kinds of things. I can wait until things happen and okay, now I got to take the phone because you didn't X, Y, and Z. When she walks into the house, there is her checklist. Her devices are away, she gets those things done and then the screen time is available, those kind of things. There's like you said, there's a
great,
system
yes,
for a behavior that I'm trying to
which you
teach.
enforce, which you make sure takes place. What happens when she's not doing the checklist?
Then you're not getting the device. Like that's just I don't have to come in with that, but at that moment I'm leaning into understanding.
You have good consequence. You have a nice system of consequences, no notes. I think that's why it's important to have that backstop. If you didn't have
But
the
when the
backstop,
relational piece is there, like you said, and when the system piece is there and a behavior is not happening, that is when you're supposed to look beneath behavior because children want to do well. And in systems, just like in a school system, they desire to do well. And so my first instinct isn't, oh, you're not listening, you're not respecting my authority. My first instinct is, we have a good relationship. You respect me as a person that you are in community with. So if you're not doing this expectation, something is happening,
but
something is going on.
okay. So let's go to the next scenario. The distinction between natural and unnatural consequences.
So, a natural consequence is something that a parent does not have to have any hand in whatsoever. Okay. You didn't put your jacket on. So now you walk outside and you're cold. That is a natural consequence. Typically, for me, when it comes to unnatural consequences, unless it's a non negotiable, I don't just impose them if it's a new situation. So my daughter is starting middle school. So there's so many things that we are just now coming up against, so many conflicts. And so I'm not going to just say, "Okay, well, hey, give me your phone cuz I don't like this behavior. This isn't going to work for me." That is a sit down and a conversation and establishing, "Okay, what do you need? What do I need? Okay, this is the boundary that we're going to try. We are a team. It's not me against you. I don't need to win. You don't need to win. We are an ecosystem and a community. We're going to try this and this is what I'm going to do to support you. Okay, you and me know you. Maybe you don't need to have your device as soon as you come home. Let's try that. Let's see how much screen time works. Let's see how much screen time does not work. Everything for me when we come up against something new is collaborative. And so when she respects me, when she listens to me, it's not necessarily just respecting my authority. This is an intrinsic behavior and habit that I have formed through support. And also, I respect you as a person. And I understand that our community within this home and culture works best when we all pitch in and help each other and meet each other's need and respect each other.
So, two things. It's not that I think my kids should walk around under the fear of a penal state that they're here. They're not. I'm chipping in all the time. I mean, you have two kids, you have all sorts of moments of resistance and indignities and whine and throughout the day. Like, how do you pick and choose? Because it's just like, I think that the collaborative approach I support in targeted cases. I don't know how one actualizes a collaborative approach to every piece of workflow resistance, need, indignity throughout like a 14-hour weekend day. Like, how do you?
There's not a lot of variability in my life intentionally. Yesterday typically looks like today in terms of routine, schedule, expectations from everybody. So that's number one. So we don't need to collaborate every single day. I always say, like, we can have a meeting about anything, but in this moment, we had an agreement. We had a mutual agreement and understanding. And so when it comes down to that, I'm not willing to change my part. And that typically is what gets quote unquote the cooperation or the respect or whatever, is understanding the difference between a boundary and a rule. So I'm meeting my side of the expectation, and I would appreciate you meeting your side of the expectation. But it's not just, oh, now you want more screen time right this second, so we're just going to completely change the expectation, completely change the flow of the day. That's not how it works in my house. But if it's a Saturday night and my daughter's like, hey, can we like talk about the screen time? Like, I want to do this or I want to do that or I'm feeling this way. That's very different than therapizing every single interaction and situation. My kids know what I'm going to do in a given situation. And some obviously as they get older, we're facing new things, but they know how I'm going to show up in a situation. So for instance, if I understand my child, collaborating isn't even always a conversation. Collaborating could simply be acknowledging and understanding who my child is as a person in regards to the tone that I take or in regards to the approach that I take in regards to how I'm speaking
Yes.
to
So
her
totally agree with
specifically.
that. Yes.
Collaboration isn't
So
always mutual verbal problem solving. It's just I care about you as a person, so when I come in your room, okay, like for instance, my oldest is like, "Hey mom, like can you knock on my door?" Sure. So if I know that I'm coming in here to check on what I asked you to do, collaboration just in that moment is, hey, like I can respect and honor that she asked me to knock, so I'll knock on her door. It's not always a conversation. Collaborative environment. Your needs, feelings, desires, wants matter just as much as mine.
when we do broader house cleanup, we play Taylor Swift and that's their trigger. It's almost like, I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. She'll come, like, the 4-year-old will come up and be like, Dad. And I'm like, why aren't you cleaning up? She's like, Dad, you need a, and I'm like, oh, right, right. So we play Taylor Swift. It's fun. To your point, I think it's
That's
like,
collaborative.
it's collaborative, right? But there are times my son, we play the Taylor Swift and he's not collaborating, right? And so his sister is like, well, he's not collaborating. So you have two separate sort of moments of resistance for different reasons, with the four C's are different for each of them. And it's like 8 o'clock at night and you're exhausted. How do I operationalize that? To me, it's much easier to say, dudes, dudes, you need to clean up your room. Just do it. Just clean up your room. That's my expectation. Is that an issue that I just say, hey, do it and expect that they do it?
I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that where is the acknowledgement that this may not be my highest
Okay.
operational self? Like there's like this leaning into it, like, yeah, of course, that's what's gonna happen sometimes, as opposed to I'm not actually modeling a behavior that I would want to receive, but this is my capacity. There's an ownership of it in digital parenting where it's like, I had a long day. I am dysregulated. I don't have the patience and the energy that I may have in another situation, as opposed to I'm the authority. and this is what I want you to do. And I think you approach it significantly different. And also, when it comes to problem solving moving forward, it's not just about changing their behavior. There is also an element of, okay, and how can I make sure that I am more present? I am more available. I am more in a leadership capacity. So maybe we don't start this at 8 o'clock next time. So I think that maybe that's the difference, because we're all going to have those survive moments. I have them.
Yeah, I think this is where you and I disagree because I think I see gentle parenting or conscious parenting as an important tool in a broader toolkit. And I don't feel like when I say just clean your room and like keep it moving, I don't feel that like that I need to do that deep dive and that deep sort of introspection and reflection. I think that's part of my toolkit is just being able to say, hey, you know what? Just do it. I think both can be in your toolkit. I think that to do what you do with just the gentle arrows in your quiver, right? And do it the way you do it is requires such a Herculean amount of energy and effort. I mean, I see all of the adherents to gentle parenting that are just doing the gentle scream. And so I think like for me, just putting that arrow of like, this is what kids want, an authority. It's Janet Lansbury. They want you to be the CEO. They want you to be a leader. You're nodding. You agree. And like just saying, yes, like when you can collaborate, please do. Lay a foundation of collaboration. Lay that deep relational foundation. But much of the time, depending on your kids and the workflow and how whatever, like an expectation that kids will do what you tell them to do and cultivating the right system of rules and consequences so that generally speaking, they just do what you tell them to do.
Well, I'm
I
not saying
like,
something different than that. What I'm saying
okay.
is that if you're not conscious of how we got to this point where it's just do what I said do, if you're not conscious of that, then the way that you express do what I said do looks different and is different. So I'm not necessarily saying that
Okay.
that does not happen. What I'm saying
Right.
is if I walk into the room and I'm not conscious of the fact, like, it's not that my kid isn't listening, it's that we got home late. So I don't need to be like outlandish and rude, and like I understand how we got here, and this is still the expectation. I get that this is rough, and this is still the expectation. Very much changes the way that I show up and approach. This is what we're still doing.
For me, some of the safety stuff, again, like you have your routines, like we're in a city, we're out and about like frequently, like sometimes I need them to do things. Like it's not that I want them to not run into traffic. Like I need them to stop.
Right.
And so like, that's where my
Is there a
orientation
fear
towards
there that
it.
if it's like, okay, if I don't um utilize this authority in not safe situations, that it's not going to be, I
Yeah,
mean, in safe situations it's not going to be respected in
it's
not safe
not the
situations?
fear. I think it's like there's degrees of safety and other things. It's like I want in a restaurant, if my kids are acting out and acting ill-mannered to use an old-fashioned term, like, but it's not just that. Like we go to this diner where there's a lot of old people. Like it's we go at 5 o'clock and they dress up, it's their night out, they're having a good time. Like having a child that's disrupting them and screaming, it's just kind of rude and not cool. So it's both, I want them to respond when we're in crowds and they're running to do something, but like I don't want them to run away. And it's also like in the diner where I just want them to like, hey, I need you to talk quieter, please. Like, please talk quiet. Like, please lower your voice. Honestly, that you're disrupting these nice people who are paying a lot to like have a night on the town. And if not, like, I need you to talk quieter. Like, I need that. It's not a
So here's
want.
the
And yeah,
difference in this is, I mean, okay,
it's a
here's this.
want. It's a want,
It is
but
a
they
want.
do it. Like
It's right, but this
it's
is the
only a
difference.
want if they don't do it almost all the time. And you need them to. And in my ecosystem, I need them to do it almost all the time, like all the time. So it's not a want.
The difference there is that my focus is, hey, we're in a restaurant, there are other people here enjoying things. That is respect versus because I said so. And I
Yeah,
don't
that's
lead
right.
with because I said so. But in order for my children to respect others and not just respect authority, I have to model that. That has to be embodied. I have to be willing to not be 100%, I gotta win.
I don't disagree. I think like the why behind it, like, sure, but just sometimes it's just like the tyranny. Like, again, it works for you, but
I
I'm
don't
speaking on
disagree with
behalf
what
of
you're saying.
it's
I
there
think
is
we're
a
having a
tyranny to every single time needing to excavate the underlying conditions. I just can't do it all the time. And so sometimes it's just like, hey, be quieter, please, please, down,
I mean,
down.
in the context of the culture of your home, it is understood that people, just as humans, deserve respect and that your views matter, your desires and preferences matter. And there's a level of compromise that goes into being a community with other people. Sure, you want to be loud in this restaurant, but we're compromising in this moment. That is easier for me to teach when I also am intentional, not in every single situation, but when I am intentional. My kids have there's a general feeling of what a relationship is, whether or not it is mutual, mutually beneficial. Mutual, I have this conversation with my kids all the time. Mutual and equal are not the same thing. Our relationship is mutually beneficial, but I'm intentional about making sure that it is. And so my kids wouldn't say like it's mom's way or the highway or that there's no room for collaboration, but they're also not going to say I just get to do whatever I want or that mom doesn't just outright tell me to do something. I think the biggest difference is which way we're leaning
Yeah,
more
right.
towards,
Exactly.
but
Yes.
not so far on either end or spectrum.
Like, do you think that your approach to parenting is right for someone that's really struggling?
I see no parent that would not benefit from being more proactive than reactive. And so no, absolutely not. At the end of the day, again, it's about what I'm going to do in a situation. It's not about me forcing you to do something. And so if I'm saying to you, I'm not willing to, my kid will come out and the whole dispassionate response isn't necessarily a consequence. It is, hey, we established the boundary. I'm not willing to unlock the screen time. And I see that you're having a hard time, right? So I already met the expectation. I see you having a hard time. Do you need some support? Do you need some help? What's going on? Do you need me to make you a checklist or whatever? I'm not just leaving you to figure it out if you're struggling with something, but at the same time, my behavior is not going to change. My behavior is going to be consistent every single time. I'm not just changing and wavering in my flexibility and what I am willing to do in a situation in meeting the expectation.
Two quick things. One, steel manning. So you take your disagreement partner's position and you put it in your own words to show that you understand it, you empathize with it. It's not your position. Steelman is very clearly you are saying the other person's position. So I'll go first
Okay.
and give me a grade. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. So the most important thing you can do when you're building a ecosystem or culture with your kids is develop um, deep connection, deep emotional and relational connection with them. And the best way to actually foster a culture of discipline is to, in every circumstance possible, reinforce those connections by treating them as collaborators on whatever the problem is and really unpacking the emotional context, the situational context with them in the spirit of like partnership. And if you do that well and you combine that with the systems, whether it's checklists or routines that are repeatable, and you can and then you combine that with an embodiment of leadership, um you can build a beautiful culture of parent child relationship that thrives. And yes, there is a backdrop of consequences, but it can stay in the backdrop.
Okay. I will give it a B minus.
Okay, okay. What did I miss? What did I miss?
The relationship is the most important thing, but
Okay.
I think that the way that you expressed it made it seem like, in terms of the amount of effort, that there should be more effort put into that than the discipline piece, and I don't think that that's the case.
Okay, great.
I
Great.
think that the relationship can take you further than the discipline piece can. So foundationally, it's most important, but I think that they are equal in the level of effort you need to put into both. It's not on the back burner. The
Excellent. Hey,
discipline
I
is not
love
on the
that.
back burner.
Hey, I'm all I'm all for that.
That's
All right, all right. Now it's your turn. You ready? You can take
okay.
time if you need.
So, what I'm hearing you say about this strict teacher approach
Strict teacher, yes, that's my
to
brand.
parenting
Trademark.
is
Yeah.
yes, is that children need and thrive when there is a clear hierarchy and authority, and when you are able to step into that, give them clear expectations, and they know what the consequences are and how you are going to respond. And that when it comes to day-to-day interactions, there doesn't need to be a ton of micro collaborating, but more so just holding your space as the authority and them responding to those expectations. But then, in a broader sense, in a general sense, if you're recognizing that something is off or the culture is off, you do have those deeper, more intuitive parenting moments where you figure out why the system you have created is not flowing.
I honestly, and this is, I've given people like D's and C's before, like that was a solid A, and I was
I'll
gonna say A
say
plus. I was gonna say A plus because honestly, in listening to you say that, it was like, oh, that is what I. Yes, that's where we got after this whole conversation. It's like, yes,
it. Okay,
that is how I feel.
I
No, I think
gotcha.
that's exactly. I honestly think that that's not like how I would have framed it going into this conversation, but I think coming out of this conversation, I do think that's sort of how I feel. So I'm sorry that I like really butchered yours. And you did such a
You did
nice
not.
job with mine.
What? A B
Okay.
is great.
Okay. Yeah, B's great. Anyway, this was awesome. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.